Hi, everyone, and welcome to this next episode of the Sustainable Connections podcast. I'm Mark Lee. I'm the Global Director of Thought Leadership at ERM, and I'm your usual host. Today, we have a bit of a different play on the Sustainable Connections theme. We're often making connections between people and organizations that are partnered in the sustainability field or offering perspective on events that have taken place within the field, like a recent podcast on the Green Biz conference in Arizona. Today, we're talking about the connection between major human events and nature. And we're going to do that by taking a quick look back at the Milano Cortina Winter Olympic Games that just took place. May have consumed some of your television and other media time in February, as it did mine. Lots of exciting events, from unbelievably heroic Norwegian skiing setting all-time Olympic records through to terrifyingly close hockey games to wrap things up at the end. The Winter Olympics, one of our most iconic global events. But I do think there's an element here where they're one of the ways that we can look at how deeply human activity depends on natural systems. Of course, in this case, snow reliability, mountain landscapes, water, climate stability, they all have an impact on how events like this take place. And as climate and nature impacts and pressures on society and business intensify, we're probably going to see more of this over time. So to explore this intersection, I'm really delighted to say that I'm joined today by Daniele Strippoli. He is a partner in ERM, same as I am, based in Milan. He's also our nature lead for EMEA. He's been thinking for a long time about what events like this can teach us about valuing nature, integrating natural capital approaches, and especially perhaps preparing for a changing climate. So Daniele, first of all, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. I understand you're sitting in an airport today, so we might be navigating a bit of background noise, but let's hear how you do sound. Please say hello and tell us that tiny bit about what that nature lead job means inside ERM.
Yes. No, thank you, Mark. And I'm very pleased to be here today. Sound check. I hope you hear me well.
You
Fantastic.
sound great.
Okay, fantastic. So, my nature job at ERM means really organizing end-to-end solution for our clients to understand the risk, to embark from a risk identification to actions, and to define what does it mean actions across their operation and value chain. At the end is really future-proofing the business resilience to exposure at risk for the natural asset, organizing solution across value chains in the ecosystem of corporation, cross services, and connecting the financial dimension with the corporation agenda. It sounds to be a quite busy time in the market for this, but yeah, very interesting and very innovative as well.
I was thinking, listening to you, that sounded like far more than one person's job. There's so much in that. Maybe a simpler question before we go into some of that detail. Given the Olympics just passed, given you were there, I think, as a spectator some of the time as well as a nature expert, do you have a favorite winter sport or a moment from the Olympic Games that really stood out for you?
That's a very interesting question. For who knows me very well knows that I'm a very passionate sport addicted with a very focus on endurance, call it a marathoner. And I'm preparing for next week to run my first marathon on Nordic ski in St. Moritz. So my most favorite sport moment and event was, I think it was 2 weeks ago. I was in Tesero to watch live, the relay marathon on Nordic ski. That, by the way, was won by Norway, but Italia scored third place. I was very proud of it in a very nice environment with my boy to recognize, how beautiful is nature and how beautiful is nature when it's connected to, people and sport activities. There was a very nice, setup and a very nice atmosphere there.
Fantastic. And we should pause to acknowledge that for all of Norway's Winter Olympic dominance, Italy really had a fantastic Winter Olympics, right? From the opening day on through, it was an incredible performance. Really successful. All right, shifting kind of into more our topic today, the connection between human events like the Winter Olympics, what we might call a mega event, global in scale and in some of its planning and construction. Given your perspective as a nature expert, what was it like to watch an event of this scale take place? And the buildup, of course, takes years. And at the very early stages, what were your expectations of what the game's impacts on nature might be?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And for context, I was very proud. I think it was 6 years ago when there was the announcement of, Milano being awarded for the events. I was, in the city center with the live award ceremony. And I thought between myself, okay, this is a big opportunity for the city, is a big opportunity for us to show the beauty of Italy, the beauty of nature. And I think when I say beauty of nature, I'm speaking about what are, let's say, the different assets associated to the concept of nature. I'm speaking at the end about ecosystem services, if you like, and the importance of nature as an asset, as provisioning of cultural services. I mean, the many, let's say, the complexity of nature in a way. And the expectation was, okay, we are speaking about, spread out Olympic Games. And I know that Olympics has this, let's say, expectation to leave a legacy, if you want, post-event. And question to myself was, okay, how this could be addressed? Because at the end, Olympics is a big infrastructure work to cope with high presence of people in a concentrated time period in time. So it's a little bit challenging. So I think, this was all in my mind when I was thinking on the concept of the complexity of building such infrastructures, at the same time optimizing the use of land and leaving legacy to the future generation in a context that I think you mentioned before, climate change. The climate change is changing. I mean, I'm very sport addicted, and every year is more complex, and I have to travel more longer to reach out the snow from Milano because
Yeah.
this is changing. So in this context, I think there was a lot of complexity. I stop here for the moment. It was refreshing to see the effort made to try to do the best on one side, at the same time manage the complexity and trying to implement operational actions, at the same time trying to build the infrastructure in a way that was effective for future opportunities, sometimes with good outcome, sometimes maybe, if I can be a little bit criticizing here, I have some personal consideration.
Yeah, and sometimes we won't know whether those facilities worked for a long time. I was struck that it was the curling arena in Cortina, right, had been built in the 1950s for prior games and became one of the really popular hubs with fans because of the noise and the characteristics of the old building. We can hope that some of the facilities built this time will age as well. You mapped so many things there, Daniele, and almost like your intro to your role, one of the themes is complexity. So dealing with complexity, often it helps to have some good tools. And you work a lot at valuing natural capital and ecosystem accounting. Did those tools, did those approaches have meaning in the context of the Olympics? And can you explain how those concepts might apply to something like planning a Winter Olympics event?
For sure. Yes, I think they have a lot of connection with the planning of an event like this one. Maybe if I may step back, what we mean for natural capital, at the end, we means the opportunity to associate an economic value to the concept of the natural resources. Whereas for nature, we define a very complex, let's say, situation, whereas there is biodiversity, there is water, there are the natural resources, but there are even more important, the ecosystem from an ecological standpoint and ecosystem services from an accounting standpoint. What is an ecosystem service? An ecosystem services is a service offered by nature to us as a community, as a business, as citizen of the world, to rely on some provisioning of supply, if you want, from nature to us. There are some that are very simple, some that are a little bit more complex, but just in the context of the Olympics, the opportunity to see a nice landscape, to see a nice mountain view, etc. This is a provisional ecosystem services that speak about the value of nature from a landscape perspective. And this create interest for tourism. This create attraction to people. This create a real economy for who lives in the valley. Clean water is another clear example of ecosystem services. So water is cleaned up by nature, and water need to be available in quantity, in quality, seasonally, for the purpose of a game, for the people joining the events, as to see the events and to support the event organization, but also to make suddenly artificial snow, because we know that snow sometimes need to be made artificially. I can continue for hours, but at the end we're speaking about connecting the variety of biodiversity and the role of nature to provide us something that can be valued. And maybe it's good that if I stop here, because I know when I get passionate about a topic, I can start speaking for hours. But yeah, I think you understood why natural capital and ecosystem services can be important in planning an event like this one.
Yeah, no, perfect. And I thought really helpful to have the two quite different examples that water people may have expected. And if they were watching on TV, sometimes when the TV pulled back the view, especially in the first week of the games, you could just see that the areas surrounding the event facilities on the mountains were barren, right? And that snowmaking had been incredibly important to have the venues prepared. And then, of course, at times in the second week, there was too much snow and things had to stop. But I really liked the introduction of the natural landscape and its aesthetic appeal and how that intersects with economies as a way to bring that concept to life. A little bit similar to the last question, Daniele, I just wonder, is there a way in which something like the games depends on natural systems that people don't always think about? If water or the landscape is a bit more obvious, what are some of the more subtle ways that nature supports a mega event like this?
Well, when you speak about dependencies at the end, you have to think that everything is out of 100, everything that is available to us in the market, in the real economy, as a strong dependencies of nature. I don't want to enter the value chain element here, because we're not speaking about the typical work we do with a corporation, whereas, we try to define where the commodities come from, if there is a critical exposure to climate change, etc. In the context of Olympic, I think is a little bit different, the situation here. There is a lot about what is the role of the natural asset to provide the real user experience, let me say this way, to the Olympic Games. We spoke about the water, the landscape, easy done, as you mentioned, but it's not only that. Nature can offer the resilience and the adaptation to climate change. When we speak about adaptation and resilience to climate change, means that people can be safe in the mountain despite the ice snow, because the landscape is capable to manage the environment in the winter condition. This is about, for example, using nature as a nature-based solution to improve the stability of land, the erosion control, the role that forests need to play in safeguarding from avalanche. There are many considerations that can be brought to the table and speak about the dependency concept. Sometimes when we think about dependencies, we think about the supply of palm oil in a given value chain to have at the end what we eat on the table. It's not only that. The dependency concept is by far more complex and speak all about the role that nature played to allow us to have our, human being and to be safe in the communities for a long term.
And as climatic conditions change and snowfall patterns shift, you mentioned in the middle there avalanche, and we just had a terrible avalanche situation in Northern California where a group very experienced with guides were caught in an avalanche, 9 people killed. And it was a situation where we'd had very, very little snow, icy, slippery surface, then several meters of snow dropped on top, and it just slipped away and crushed this group. So we need to learn to interact with nature differently as climatic conditions change as well. Brought in some of the people elements, Daniele, and I wonder, when we think about resources, often we think, fortunately or unfortunately, about resource competition. And so do you see, or do you have an observation on how the Olympics and their planning take social considerations and community considerations into account along with the environmental? Because, of course, the community needs the same water that was being used to make snow, and you might have better examples.
When we speak about the concept of natural capital, of course, we speak about the local communities, the people agenda. Okay, because at the end, I think natural capital is really about how you use the land, the natural resources to provide at the end financial flow to the local territories through the value of nature. That is a resource, is an asset to be valorized and to be protected. In the context of the Olympics, the infrastructure development go through some large, let's say, licensing and permitting processes. I think there is still space in the agenda to ensure that the social dimension and the role of ecosystem and the natural capital dimension is captured at scale. So this is what I was meaning before when I said I've seen something doing well, working well, something less. I think the concept of spreading out the Olympics across the territory was a good idea. This gave the opportunity to avoid concentrating a lot of people and a lot of infrastructure in the same territory. At the same time, trying to valorize as much as possible what is existing and hopefully trying to leave legacy to the territory where legacy is needed. But at the same time, I've seen some situation where probably the management of the associated impact related to the new infrastructure maybe was not perfect, if I may. And I think this is a huge challenge for the future because I do believe that Olympics games are, the life-changing experience, especially in some economies, and can really stewardship some, let's say, future safeguarding for communities that live, especially for the winter game, in very complex environment. And I know the CIO is working on that, but I think we are not yet there to the state of the art, if I may. And I see more and more the market trying to address climate, nature, and social agenda together. Sometimes we speak about just transition, if you want. I think there is a just transition opportunity for the Olympics, and maybe it was not fully captured this time.
And maybe that needs to be considered more in kind of the legacy planning for the Olympics, that when you're starting the process, you're already thinking about the people impacts at the end of it and in an integrated fashion. And I guess maybe that's where I want to go with the next question as a follow-up, Daniele, is integration the challenge? Is there something that the Winter Olympics and events like it can teach us about the need to make that climate, nature, and social considerations planning come together differently?
This is a personal view, okay? This is a personal view about what I see in the market, of course. I strongly believe that when we address the nature agenda, we speak about a systemic challenge that require connectivity among different users of the same, let's say, territory. And when we speak about these large events, we speak about how to integrate these in an even more complex agenda, as you said, climate, nature, social together. And to me, this is a real opportunity to, at the end, if you think the return of investment of the Olympics, okay, let's imagine the future that you plan for every dollar spent, an outcome, and the outcome is increased value of asset. What is the asset? Is the natural capital. And the natural capital describes very well the nature element, the social agenda, because we speak about the ecosystem services to local communities, to society, but speaks also about climate resilience if well addressed. How to future-proof the facilities to climate change. For example, I think a role to play in the Winter Games for the Olympics is also to help people understanding that it's not only downhill ski. What is interesting in the agenda, downhill ski is suffering a lot climate change. There are other interesting activities to be done outside in the winter time. That can be an opportunity to revisit the infrastructure of some venues to be future-proofed for climate change, whilst protecting the natural capital and increasing the biodiversity protection, and at the same time increasing the livelihood of local people that will have a long-term safeguarding of their interest in the valley. Maybe it's a little bit looking too much farther, but I strongly believe that this could be an equation for the next generation of games.
Yeah, no, it sounds like there's the potential there for what we learn about climate resilience, adaptation, and mitigation through planning things like the Olympics to bring benefits back to the community and the society as well, as long as we're sort of intentionally doing that. Daniele, I know we're a bit pressed on time. I'd love to try and fit in two more questions if I can.
Yes,
and the first one takes us back to natural capital accounting. So we touched it briefly more towards the start. I wonder if there's one or two examples you could give us of how natural capital accounting could help us improve planning and decision-making for future Olympics or future things like it? Site identification, resource use. Is there a way you see these can connect next and improve?
No, I think it's a very good question. And yes, I see that. To me, and I can trade off what we are doing, in the mining sector for other, let's say, kind of, regional planning and asset site identification. To me, at the end, is put the value of nature as part of the regional planning and the zoning and the siting, and making sure that you are not just only mitigating the impact that you can of course calculate. Okay, how to offset the biodiversity impact? I cut down a forest, I balance with new nature. Okay, on paper is good. But what if we start considering a different way to consider the zoning and the planning of the facility development from a view that capture, the dimension of the natural capital as a driver for decision making?
Great. And one of the things I heard in that last reply, Daniele, was there's another need to connect more locally, that you emphasize putting it into regional plans. And sometimes these mega events, at least in the media, they get captured as being very strongly pushed by national governments, and the local considerations aren't fully taken into account. But where I want to go now, I started, Daniele, asking you about a kind of Olympics moment, favorite sport. And now I want to close with something personal too, and that's to ask, how has your own view of nature's value evolved through your own experiences with the Olympics?
That's an interesting question. So, well, I'm an expert in the field, so I think my view has been just truly endorsed from the perspective of seeing Italian beauties, Italian Alps on the media, on the TV, and speaking with clients, colleagues across the world, valuing this, not only from the performance of the athlete, but also from what does represent. Okay, and this was a reassurance, if you want, but was also interesting to be on one of the events with my boy. It was funny because we had to park the car into a temporary parking lot, and there were some temporary facility to avoid damages on the soil. And I explained to him what does it mean and why this was done, and what is the concept of temporary siting without jeopardizing biodiversity to protect the soil health for the next cycle in the spring. And to me, it was an opportunity to transfer a little bit of my work experience into the personal life, to my family, to my close one. And yeah, I hope it will bring somehow at school with his classmate. Speaking about that, so I think there was also a very good effort on communicating a narrative around sustainability at the games. I was quite proud of it, with a lot of attention to the selection of material, the recycling, etc. So, I think these events are events that are once in the life for some people. And if you see that there is some, let's say, structured approach to problem that we see are connected to us, especially for the young generation, well, maybe this is a legacy concept, different from the infrastructure legacy, but still very important, maybe even more important, I think.
Now, lovely way to wrap, Daniele, and great to hear about your kind of teaching moment with your son, kind of an intergenerational passing on of knowledge there. And one thing you mentioned earlier, too, would be remiss in closing today if we didn't wish you well with your own Nordic ski marathon upcoming. How far are you going to go? Is this 30K? Is this 50K? What's the self-test?
No, it's a real marathon, Mark. It's 42.195K.
Oh, funny, but on skis.
Yeah,
yes, this is.
Yeah, on ski, not the ski.
Traditional marathon distance on skis.
Yeah,
okay,
on ski. Yes.
Excellent. Well, I hope that goes exceptionally.
For next episode, I will tell you how it went.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear.
Fantastic.
To all of our listeners, thank you for hanging in with us today. Hope these observations on nature, climate, and community through the lens of the Winter Olympics were interesting and illustrative for you. We'd always love to hear feedback on these podcasts. All of them are available on erm.com or on your favorite streaming platform. Thank you for listening to Sustainable Connections today.